Mr. Chairman.
Maggie Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to speak about the Tasman District Council validation and recovery of certain rates bill. This is, of course, a piece of legislation that should never have happened. Other speakers before me have alluded to the fact that it is a series of mistakes, incompetence, silliness, generally a darn good reason why these local government reforms that we're putting through ought to be put through in extreme haste, because what we had here was a council who was, in the words of the sponsoring member, arrogant. They were not treating their ratepayers well. I commend also Bob Schmucky for his tenacity. I think that he is an individual who decided that he would make this something that he would not let go, and I commend his tenacity and the rigour that he brought to this particular case, because had he not persevered, as Damien O'Connor said, taking it through to the Ombudsman, really persisting when he was given the cold shoulder and every discouragement possible, then we wouldn't be here today. On some levels, of course, we regret being here today because we've lived through Kaipara, and it's a bit like the Jaws movie, isn't it? Just when you thought it was safe to come back in the House, another validation bill comes its way. And I guess, none of us want that. And as other members have pointed out, not only has council and ratepayers' money been wasted and everybody's time over a long period of years, but also now the taxpayers are bearing the burden for this having to come to the House, for the waste of the House's time, for the waste of effort that all the advisors and everyone else, let alone the sponsoring member, have had to put into this. I'd have to say it is a little ironic when we hear the Winston First Party member, Andrew Williams, who has a former association with the North Shore, trying to teach us about what's going on.
Point of order, Dennis.
Object to the term Winston First. That's not the correct name of the member.
Sure. Yes, look, members must refer to honourable members of this House by their correct name. So in future, that will be abided by. Maggie Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I was saying, for someone like Andrew Williams, who failed so spectacularly on the North Shore, to attempt to give us lessons, the North Shore's most famous irrigator dares to try and hand down a few lessons hand up a few lessons. North Shore's most famous irrigator. Surely you've heard the stories. Everybody on the North Shore has an Andrew Williams story, and most of them couldn't be repeated here in the House. And I wouldn't waste the House's time going through them. Yet again, they've been well tracked through. Interesting to see that he talks about his insomnia. I think his treatments for it were the traditional ones, which had then enlivened his late-night texting and caused him the sort of infamy that even he will never live down. But it is ridiculous to lemonade, whatever it was, who knows, you don't want to go into those dark thoughts of what he might have had. I guess that aiding the lemon, yes, he would have had something to go with the lemons, yes, you're quite right. There's some very helpful advice coming through. But when he talks about people making mistakes at local government level, he is, after all, the experts in that matter, because, mistakes, he's made a few, and they continue to haunt him to this day. So it is layers and layers of irony that such a failed individual, who has so conspicuously not delivered in his own area, the lowest polling candidate, the guy who never made it back as mayor, didn't even get back on one of the local boards. I mean, this is the kind of individual that we will not be taking notice of, and will certainly not be following any advice that he gives, because after all, he is an individual who has clearly, in fact, I'm surprised that we didn't have a North Shore Council validation bill from mistakes that man would have made when he was the mayor. No, that's all been abolished now, partly because of people like himself. But as I've said, the local government reforms that this government is putting through at the moment are, of course, absolutely essential when we look at what's happened with Kaipara and with the Tasman District Council. I think when you do look at incompetence and slack councils, the ratepayers are in a position where they really do need central government to step in and lead the way. It's disappointing that it has to happen, very disappointing, but this is a government that does not shirk from its responsibilities, and we will ensure that we go through. We will absolutely ensure that the legislation goes through with due consultation and through due process, unlike what happened with the Tasman District Council. When I look at some of the submissions that we had, Lindsay McKenzie, the Chief Executive, came to us this was the council that actually was part of the problem. The individuals, I think, and perhaps the sponsoring member might like to clarify this point for us, but in terms of the people who were in positions of responsibility when this mistake with the map was made, I'd be interested. Mr Chair? Mr Chair?
Maggie Berry.
Thank you, Mr Chair. It would be interesting to know just how many of them were still involved, or did the ratepayers get their way ultimately and do what all people need to do when they don't like people in public office, they vote them out. We've seen that, of course, with Labour, who had, I think, their lowest polling ever, would it have been in the last elections, or was that in 2008? Anyway, voters, whether they are paying their rates or paying their taxes, are absolutely within their rights to exercise their democratic right to vote people out. So I'm assuming that most of the people who caused the problems at the Tasman District Council were thrown out on their ear. The background of this bill is indeed interesting. I think when you look at the options that they left themselves, there weren't too many. Three, in fact, were outlined to us by the Chief Executive of the now Tasman District Council. Order in council, that was one of the things that they could have been given through their legal advice. A replacement rate was the other option, and then a local bill. And that's when Damien O'Connor took up the challenge of putting this through. They had no choice. They'd boxed themselves into a corner, and that's why they are here today. I think the other standout submission for me was from the Office of the Mayor of the Tasman District Council. When he came to us, he wrote us a submission, of course, and then Richard Kempthorne came and saw us as well and talked about the fact that the council did admit and acknowledge that they'd made an error in setting those 2006-2007 rates for the Tata Beach, Liger Bay stormwater urban drainage area. They regretted that that error was made, and they fessed up to it. But they also noted, and I think this is an important point, that if they had included that map, the rate would have been lawfully made and the rates would have been payable. Therefore, passing the bill in its current form would validate a rate that would have been made lawful if the map had been included. We are not asking the Select Committee to validate something the Council could not have done lawfully if we hadn't made the mistake. So when we look at the facts of the matter as they were outlined and admitted by the Mayor, the facts were very clear and very straightforward. And the enduring miracle, apart from the fact that the person who's trying to interject at the moment was ever elected mayor, let alone thrown out in his ear after one term, apart from that miracle of silliness from the ratepayers and momentary aberration, the fact that this council did actually get up and admit that they'd done wrong and admitted and supported what Damien O'Connor has done is ultimately a commendable thing. I think when we look at this bill, it is pretty straightforward. There are a matter of things that need to be learned, and I must say, when the Select Committee was presented with some of those laminated photographs of the beach area, and we looked at the the Liger Bay area in particular, we could see that it was a pretty straightforward sort of a solution. So ultimately, I guess there are silver linings to this particular cloud, and one of them is that basically this won't happen again. Certainly not in this neck of the woods in Tasman. Hopefully not in Kaipara either. And I think that once we continue on and look at what we can do as a government to continue on with local government reforms, we can ensure that ratepayers are protected from the sort of silliness that we've seen in both of these places around New Zealand, which have resulted in members' bill which are expensive, time-consuming, and ultimately things that we'd rather not have to go through, but we're here. There was unanimity across the Select Committee. It is the price of democracy, and it's what we need to do, really, to ensure. As Alan Martin used to say, it's the putting right that counts, and that's what's happening. So I commend Damien O'Connor for putting this bill through. I would be very interested in the sponsoring member's response to the question I put to him about how many of the council remain, and if there is still a residue of bitterness and anger in that community, or whether by putting this validation through, that it will put things right for a community that have suffered. And for someone like Bob Schmucky, I hope that the slurs on his reputation, the put-downs and the arrogance that he had to endure have been worth it. I haven't heard back from Mr Schmucky at all, but I did commend him on his tenacity at the time and welcomed that he had come through to us. And I hope that, Mr O'Connor, you will pass on. We do need more Mr Schmuckies. We could have used them on the North Shore a few years ago, but, you know, we've come right now, and it's all working terrifically well. And I think they're very well represented by Jonathan Coleman on one side at Northcote, and once again a Labor seat briefly, but people saw the light, and Jonathan Coleman was then introduced. I will have to leave it there. All choked up. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Choking on her own file.
Claudette Howitt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Kia ora.